people think about the early days of MMA, they usually imagine a sport with almost no rules, just two fighters stepping in to see who's tougher. And honestly, that wasn't too far from the truth. In the beginning, things like groin strikes, headbutts, and even throwing your opponent out of the cage were completely legal. But over time, each wild moment and every strange incident forced organizers to make changes. Bit by bit, the sport became safer, more structured, and a lot more professional. These are some of the key moments that pushed MMA to evolve, the fights and situations that led to new rules and shaped the sport into what we know today. Let's start with number 10, the Vaseline gate. In every fight, a bit of Vaseline is used on a fighter's face to keep their skin from tearing and to reduce friction when punches land. It's a normal part of the sport. But years ago, during UFC 94, something unusual happened that ended up changing the rulebook. During Georges St-Pierre's title fight with BJ Penn, someone from GSP's corner was seen rubbing Vaseline on his shoulders and back instead of just his face. That might not sound like a big deal, but since Vaseline is slippery, it could make it harder for an opponent to hold on during grappling. BJ Penn and his team were angry, and even Dana White reacted right there by the cage. Officials quickly stepped in, wiped GSP down, and the fight continued. But the moment caused a lot of debate. After that event, the Athletic Commission decided to fix the issue for good. From then on, only official cutmen were allowed to apply Vaseline, not the fighters' corners. It was a small rule change, but an important one that helped keep things fair inside the octagon. Next up, at number 9, no more Speedos. Back at UFC 133, something happened that no one expected. And it had nothing to do with punches or submissions. Fighter Dennis Hallman showed up wearing the smallest blue trunks anyone had ever seen inside the octagon. They looked more like a swimsuit than fight shorts. Hallman later said he lost a bet with his teammates, which is why he wore them. But the whole thing quickly turned awkward. His opponent, Brian Ebersole, ended up winning the fight. But the main thing people remembered wasn't the result. It was Hallman's outfit. After the event, Dana White was furious. He called it disgusting and said it would never happen again in the UFC. And he meant it. From that day on, fighters were required to wear proper shorts that met certain guidelines. Hallman did win his next fight, but his UFC contract wasn't renewed afterward. Dana said it wasn't because of the shorts, but it's hard to ignore how memorable that moment was. Even today, if you search Dennis Hallman online, Speedo still shows up next to his name. At number 8, we have one of the strangest rules ever made. The ban on 12-6 elbows. The straight up and down elbow, called the 12-6 elbow, is one of the most debated illegal moves in MMA. It was banned after a 2000 fight where Giant Gan McGee used several of these elbows on his opponent, Brad Gabriel. A doctor at that event thought the move was too dangerous and wanted to ban all elbows. In the end, they decided to only ban this straight downward strike. Since then, 12-6 elbows have stayed illegal under MMA's unified rules. Moving on to number 7, throwing an opponent over the cage. Back in 1996, during a fight between Tank Abbott and Cal Worsham, Tank tried to throw his opponent over the cage. He almost succeeded, and Worsham said later that only the padding in his heel stopped him from falling out. The incident showed how dangerous that could be. Soon after, officials made a new rule. Any fighter who tries to throw their opponent over the cage will be disqualified. This also led to another rule: no grabbing the fence during a fight. Number 6 takes us to a less glamorous part of MMA history: short grabbing. In 1998, during a title fight between Pat Miletich and Mikey Burnett, both fighters kept grabbing each other's shorts to hold position. It made the fight slow and awkward, and even the referee had to step in to fix the shorts during the match. After that, the rule was made clear: no grabbing or holding your opponent's clothing for advantage. Halfway through the list, number 5 brings us to the birth of TKOs. In the early days of the UFC, fights could only end in 3 ways: a knockout, a submission, or a corner throwing in the towel. Referees weren't allowed to stop fights, no matter how bad things got. At the first UFC event, Gerard Gordeau kicked Taylor Tooley so hard that one of Tooley's teeth flew into the crowd. The referee stopped the fight for safety reasons, but UFC founder Rorion Gracie wasn't happy about it. He wanted fights to go until someone was completely done, with no early stoppages at all. Things got worse at UFC 2, when Pat Smith unleashed a brutal series of elbows on Scott Morris. Referee Big John McCarthy couldn't stop it because the rules didn't allow him to, and he had to just watch until the beating was clearly over. After that fight, McCarthy told Rorion he would quit unless referees were given the power to protect fighters. The UFC agreed, and by UFC 3, refs were finally allowed to stop fights, creating what we now know as the technical knockout, or TKO. At number 4, groin shots, a painful but important rule change. In the early days of MMA, groin strikes were still legal. At an event in 1997, fighter Gary Goodridge used several groin attacks on his opponent Pedro Octavio, even grabbing him to escape a bad position. The incident caused a rule change in that promotion, banning any strikes or grabs to the groin. A few years later, the UFC also banned groin shots after growing public pressure, making it one of the most important safety rules in the sport. Coming in at number 3, the fight that gave us stand-ups, the lay and pray rule. At UFC 5, fans were excited for the rematch between Royce Gracie and Ken Shamrock, expecting a great grappling fight. Instead, Shamrock stayed on top of Gracie for 36 minutes, barely attacking and only defending. A boring fight with no action. Since there was no rule to stand fighters up for inactivity, the match ended in a draw, the first in UFC history. After this, referees were given the power to stand fighters up if they stopped engaging, and time limits were also added to prevent such long, uneventful fights again. Number 2 focuses on how judges first entered the sport. Early UFC events had no judges. Fights ended only by knockout, submission, or corner stoppage. But after adding time limits and stand-ups, draws still happened. At UFC 7, Ken Shamrock fought Oleg Taktarov, and after 33 slow minutes, neither man finished the fight, so it ended in another draw. Fans were disappointed again. To fix this, the UFC added judges and scorecards at the next event, along with 15-minute time limits, so fights could have a clear winner even without a finish. And finally, number 1. Championships weight cutting rule. Weight cutting is one of the most dangerous and unnecessary parts of MMA. Fighters often dehydrate themselves severely just to compete in a lighter division and gain a size advantage the next day. In December 2015, tragedy struck when 21-year-old Chinese flyweight Yang Jianbing passed away due to extreme dehydration while trying to make weight. This heartbreaking incident forced one championship to completely change its system. The organization introduced hydration tests and new weight divisions to stop fighters from draining themselves before fights. Instead of cutting large amounts of water weight, athletes now fight closer to their natural weight. However, there's still debate about how effective the system really is. Some fighters, like Eddie Alvarez and Demetrius Johnson, have said that their opponents still look much bigger on fight night, suggesting that some athletes may still find ways to cut weight within the rules. Despite these concerns, one's hydration system is still seen as a huge step forward for fighter safety. It's a reminder that no sport should ever risk lives, and hopefully, similar rules will spread across MMA worldwide before another tragedy happens. That was a look at some of the biggest rule changes that shaped modern MMA. The sport has changed a lot from its early days, where almost anything was allowed, to what we see now, a balance between skill, safety, and competition. Every rule came from experience, mistakes, and sometimes serious incidents, but each one made the game better for fighters and fans. MMA keeps growing, and these changes are a big reason why it's still one of the most exciting sports in the world today.